The Darksteel Eye by Jess LaBelle, Book 2 of the Mirrodin Cycle. Chapter 1. Alone in his laboratory, Memnock closed the latch on the arm cuff and finished strapping himself in. A giant humming of a construct covered by tubes and funnels crouched high over his bulbous frame.
Yes, yes, he said. Everything is working properly.
Memnock eyed the straps and the glittering lights covering the artifact.
So much effort for something so simple. Would it have taken so much to have built it?
He listened.
I thought not.
He cleared his throat and fingered a tiny lever. Gargantuan articulated arms on the back of the device unfolded, then unfolded again. They moved with practiced precision, a simple grace that belied their size and bulky tubes attached. The metallic limbs enveloped Memnock and its cushioned restraint. They buzzed with magical power.
You see that?
He said, admiring the leather straps that held his body.
These bonds, Memnock, endured in your name. The self-imprisonment of worship. If you ever doubted, now you know. Memnock is a true disciple.
Memnock's right appendage moved. 3 beams issued from each of the mechanical arms, crisscrossing his flesh. Tiny pinpricks of light moved over his skin, illuminating the tissues and vessels underneath with an eerie orange glow. A soft click echoed through the laboratory, and the arms shook a bit as they locked into place.
But you never doubted. Memnock knows.
Memnock closed his eyes and leaned his head back into a padded cradle. The soft curve held him firmly, and for a brief moment, the being strapped inside the device relaxed. Breathing a gentle sigh, this would be the most peaceful instant of this day, and he wanted to enjoy it. In that brief moment, there would be a balance of pleasure and pain, darkness and light, good and evil. After that, there would be work to do. With a deep breath, Memnock focused on the manner that would start the infusion. He felt the warm glow of power flow up his spine and out his fingertips, and he braced himself against the restraints. The hum of magic filled his ears, then the sound of bubbles coursing through thick liquid filled his laboratory. The serum transference began. The magical process did not hurt, but the infusion was not without pain. The liquid was thick, thicker than his blood, and it took a while to enter his bloodstream as it crossed from the storage vessels into his body. He could feel the strain on his body. It felt almost as if he were drowning, but on the inside out. Slowly, the serum made its way through his body. When it hit his heart, it burst into flame, and he felt as if he were being burned alive. An excruciating pleasure that both exhilarated and tormented him. This was the moment he had built the artifact for, the reason he strapped himself in before each dose. After several pumps of his heart, his whole body was flooded with the serum. It hadn't been like this before. It hadn't taken so much effort. But he hadn't needed so much for the serum then. Every muscle tightened and he tried to hold back the unbearable pleasure. He screamed, or at least he thought he screamed, lost in the overwhelming sensation that he honestly couldn't say what the rest of his body did while he suffered. After a moment more, the fire entered his brain, and he opened his eyes. Every morning he followed the same ritual. Rarely did he see anything, nothing definitive. Tears filled his eyes and ran down his cheeks. The dark grey tiles lining the floor of his laboratory swirled together with the blue of the walls, light coming through the enormous window mixed with reds and yellows. The artifact, weapons, and scrying instruments inside his laboratory were invisible through the pleasure. What Memnock saw resembled a puddle of liquid silver, reflecting and distorting the colours of Mirrodin.
Master, you've come.
Memnock held his eyes open, fearing that if he blinked, the distorted image before him would disappear. Then the burning would peak, climbing to the point where it could get no better or no worse. Lingering at the height of pleasure and pain, he held his breath. The serum's effects receded slowly, leaving him soaked with the memory of its presence. As the burning slipped away, turning back into a knife blade and drifting again into a dull sting of an insect, It revealed to Memnoch a new power. His mind became clearer, his thoughts more brilliant, his understanding of all things more perfect. His overlarge bulbous felt more nimble, less burdensome, more alive. His 4 hydraulically enhanced limbs felt stronger, and his 6 magically perfected eyes now revealed the true secrets of the world. The tears ran away, clearing his sight, his vision of the Creator, his Master, slipping away. The floors and walls took shape. His scrying pedestal rose up from the ground, cradling in its basin a pool of silvery liquid, and the massive window that formed one of the whole walls of his laboratory came back into view. Beyond it, the glowing blue-white ball of pure mana at the center of Mirrodin pulsed, and its rays warmed his face. Memnoch gazed out of the window. Crystal-shaped chrome spires rose up from the curved ground, reaching for the mana core like plants to a sun. Odd how organic life copies artifice. Is it the same on other planes? He listened. Yes, that is what Memnoch thought. The door slid open, and a figure entered the room. It was a metallic bipedal creature, similar in shape to the elves or humans of the outer world, noticeably lacking the enhancements and improvements Memnoch had given himself. Memnoch recognized the creature immediately. Malil, he said. Come in, come in. Is everything all right, Master? I heard screaming. Memnoch maneuvered controls, and the articulated arms withdrew, the straps holding his body inert during the ritual released, and the device let out a long, slow hiss. Yes, everything is just fine, is it not? Memnoch scuttled across the floor towards his servant, the tips of his metallic crab-like legs clicking as they tapped on the stone tiles, the base for his gigantic abdomen dragging along behind him. Thank you for asking us. He could feel the muscles on his back relax, and the sensation of simple calm wash over the last remnants of exhilaration from the infusion. Malil stepped to one side, looking past Memnoch at the huge device. Memnoch watched Malil examine the device. He smiled at the metal man's obvious wonderment. Pride swelled within him, and he looked down on Malil's face, a face nearly identical to his own. He is curious, said Memnoch, looking away from Malil. Shall we tell him what we have created? Malil turned to Memnoch and blinked. Yes, master. He turned back to the device. What does it do? Memnoch smiled. Many things, Malil, many things. What kind of things? Memnoch crossed the laboratory again, looking into the glass funnel full of milky white liquid. He stroked it gently as if it were a favored pet. To begin, he said, not turning away from the device as he spoke, it harvests and stores blinkmoth serum. Is that not right? Malil stood completely still, not making a sound. Memnoch laughed, slowly at first. The problems he had faced only the day before seemed trivial now. Why had he been so concerned over such an insignificant thought? His laughter became hysterical, and his body convulsed. Is it not wonderful? He asked between breaths. Yes, master, replied Malil. Memnoch abruptly stopped laughing. Why must we be surrounded by such puny minds? He said, slamming his fist against the edge of the device. On one side, Memnoch is in the presence of greatness, on the other, the presence of nothing. Lifting himself to his full height, he moved around the control unit, touching one of the arms. Yes, Memnoch knows. You are right. He turned back to his servant, continuing his tour of the device. Here is the delivery system, he explained, rubbing a smear mark from the brightly polished chrome. Delivery system? Memnoch spun on Malil, his legs clicking against the tiles. Yes, the delivery system. He crossed his arms over his chest. You see what Memnoch must deal with, how he lacks the intellect to understand. Malil lowered his eyes to the floor. I see. Memnoch scrutinized his servant. Malil was tall by elf standards, with an ordinary pair of legs and matching arms. He had a wide, strong chin that mimicked that of a human, and narrow, gently sloping shoulders. Except for the fact that he was made entirely of metal, Malil could pass for one of the humans on the surface. Memnock turned away towards the window. At one time he had looked just like Malil. At one time he too had been made entirely of metal. The thought made him sad. He looked down at his hands. A line of red liquid seeped over the edge of his fist where he slammed it against the device. Memnock touched the spot with his finger. He actually bled. Memnock, the guardian of Mirrodin, was bleeding. His sadness turned to anger.
Is this what you intended for me?
He held up his bleeding fist.
When Memnock was made, was this what you imagined?
Malil stepped forward a step. Master? Memnock looked back and down at his arm.
This is not what the Creator intended, is it?
Memnock shook his head.
You, who made Mirrodin, then placed it in Memnock's custody, did not want this?
He listened but heard nothing.
Has Memnock not been faithful?
He listened again.
Of course, so why have you forsaken Memnock?
Memnock paced the lab. He ran from the room, then paced his way back the way he had came, his feet making a high-pitched grinding noise on the tile as he spun.
You have not, he continued. Memnock's perfect body, the body you gave Memnock, created for Memnock, is slowly turning to flesh. If this is not your wish, then whose? If you had not wanted this, then why is it happening? Has Memnock failed?
Memnock shook his head. No. Memnock could not. Memnock would not. Memnock has been given the task of protecting Mirrodin, or caring for it until the Creator itself returns. Memnock has done that. Memnock has done the very thing you asked of him, and more. Master? Memnock looked up. Malil blinked, watching him. Master, are you all right? Yes, he said. Why would Memnock not be all right? The scrying pedestal in the middle of the laboratory began to change colours, wavering dark blue. Memnock scuttled over to it, lifting his considerable girth off of the floor so as not to drag it along behind him. Setting down before the metal pool, he looked into the silvery liquid. Ripples formed at the centre of the perfect circle, spreading out in rings towards the edge of the basin. Images began to form. Images of gigantic metal tunnel.
The blue lacuna.
Memnock brought his metal head closer to the basin.
Something is coming down the blue lacuna. Something coming to see us.
Malil crossed the room beside his master, gazing down into the pool. More images began to form. Fuzzy pictures, and they were moving fast. Memnock squinted, focusing his attention on the scrying pedestal. The images grew clearer. They were bipedal and moved upright. There were several figures, perhaps 24, maybe more.
Vidalcan, he said.
Malil shifted his weight. Why would Vidalcan be coming now?
A good question. Memnock waved his hand over the pool. Memnock has not granted them an audience.
His voice trailed off.
They seem to be chasing something. We do love a good chase.
He stared into the scrying pool.
This is most unusual.
The wavering silvery liquid suddenly grew crystal clear. A tall, slender female elf appeared. Her arms and lower legs were like most creatures of this world, covered in thick metal that seemed to grow from her skin as if it were part of her body. Her medium-length hair was held back by a strip of tanned hide, and she wore a leather jerkin that covered most of the rest of her body.
She is here, gasped Memnock.
Who, master? Memnock looked up from the pedestal. His skin tingled with delight. His bones ached with excitement, and his mind raced over all the work he still had unfinished.
She is here, he repeated. The one.
He turned to Malil.
The elf girl.
Malil straightened to attention. What are your desires, my master? Memnock rubbed his hands together, and he ran his tongue over his dry, parched lips.
Bring her to us.
Malil bowed his head, turned on his heels, and exited the same way he had come in. Memnarch leaned down over the silvery pool once again.
Memnarch had not expected you so soon.
Malil marched at double speed along the long, curved corridor. His path led him to a gentle downward spiral. A long way to go to get to Memnarch's laboratory to the next level. As he descended, he ran over the scene with Memnarch in his head. He'd spoken to the elf girl before. Malil didn't claim to understand everything. He knew only the things that Memnarch told him and the things he'd witnessed for himself, but both of those were considerable. Memnarch's regular scolding repeated itself in his ears.
You do not need to know everything. You need only follow Memnarch's directions.
The metal man redoubled his speed, stepping off the causeway. Malil entered the observation platform. This room, by design, was completely empty, and the outer walls were made of one continuous piece of magically curved glass. From here, he could see the entire interior of Mirrodin. Out of the window at the center of the plane, a huge ball of blue-white mana floated above everything. Below that, the ground curved up in every direction, encircling the glowing sphere, and eventually meeting itself on the other side, forming both floor and ceiling of the interior. Pointy chrome towers called mycosynth rose from the ground, reaching up like gnarled, sharpened fingers grasping for the ball of power above them. Malil crossed the open chamber to a spot at its very center, where the red circle marked the floor, and the metal man stepped onto it. Ground level, he said. The room filled with the hum of magic, and the floor descended, slowly at first, then picking up speed. It slowed and finally stopped. Malil walked down a short ramp, stopped at a waist-high railing, and looked over the edge at the legion of metal warriors. Each was identical. They had curved heads, each with singular glowing yellow eye in the center. Their eyes came from their sides, growing wider and thicker as they extended, ending in gigantic razor-sharp blades. The warriors' torsos were armored with metal plates, interlocking over one another so that they could move independently, without exposing their delicate insides to harm. Where a human or elf would have legs, these warriors had two wheels tipped with heavy spikes sharp enough to puncture even the strongest metal. On their backs, each one had a short trifold sail, which they used to steer themselves across the vast open expanses of Mirrodin. The metallic killers crouched, quietly, ready and loyal, prepared to stay where they were used for an eternity, or cut down an army at a moment's notice. Malil smiled. "Open the gates," he shouted. "The Guardian wishes for us to bring back an elf."